chatting this half hour with our Chief of Police in Battle Creek, Jim Blocker. Good morning, sir.
And good morning to you, Richard.
Welcome back. We have a number of things we could talk about, but let's start with the whole panhandling discussion, which we've been following here on the morning show. And this is one of those vexing kind of issues that can be tough to deal with.
It can be. And I think one thing that we are experiencing, certainly as we go to these workshops and the commission meetings that we've had over the last few weeks, is that this community is a compassionate community. We have people that are really concerned about what are we doing with this population, in other words, community members without homes in our community. And what we are continually trying to emphasize to folks is that this is not an effort to thwart, change, adjust, or impede that community, but rather it's about controlling behavior in specific parts of town so that really all of us can one, operate within the rules, operate within the norms that we expect in our community. And when folks go offline, we at least now have a tool to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the nature of this problem is one in which when you're called, it is a bit of a balancing act, isn't it? Because you're trying to assuage the person who's called and address an issue, but yet you have to be sensitive about it.
Well, precisely. And I think the absence of a law is not reducing the number of 911 calls for us to go and deal with it. The challenge, though, is we don't have any tool to deal with it. And so it's almost creating more work and more of a problem than it really should be. And so this ordinance at least gives us a tool to address the aggressive behavior. And again, we've really been conscientious about making a distinction between what we're talking about is two different groups, two different characterizations here. There are folks that are known to us. There are folks that our officers have been dealing with. We know them on a first-name basis. They're not the issue. They, though, would agree with us that it's the outside groups that are traveling from community to community, making between $300 to $600 a day. Those aren't my numbers. Those are numbers coming out of a lot of the not-for-profit organizations who recognize and acknowledge that this is impacting the work that they're doing while others are here profiting, and then they're moving on to other communities.
$300 to $600 a day.
I was actually shocked when I heard that number, but it's pretty realistic if you think if you're out there for an hour or two and everyone's giving you a 5 or a 10 or even perhaps a 20, it can be lucrative really quickly.
Mm-hmm. You know, we talked with Commissioner Benke and the city attorney this week about this issue, and the city attorney had some interesting perspective. I mean, she looks at it from the legal angle, of course, but also from the perspective of working in City Hall, and some folks who might fall under this umbrella description of aggressive panhandlers are nearby, and she had some personal experience witnessing some of that behavior, but she set that group into a distinctive area like you have in saying that these are people who are particularly aggressive, and they don't want change, or they don't want food, and they will push for an amount of money, which apparently adds up to the total that you just cited. But is that the way you see it, a specific group?
It is. And, you know, specific to City Hall or any other location, I don't think that our community should have to walk this gauntlet every time they want to visit City Hall. Mm-hmm. I don't think folks should have to feel that overpressured to give. It's much like I've used the telemarketing. Even our nation recognized that, all right, the telemarketing are getting aggressive. We're not saying you can't do it, but after a certain time at night, you have to stop. Well, that's really what we're doing here. We're resetting some rules, and we're getting a tool. Law enforcement is getting a tool to work with. The concern about over-enforcement, I think, it shouldn't be one, although I appreciate the fact that it is, because even when we did have begging, loitering, vagrancy on the books, they were rarely enforced, but rather used as a part of an overall community strategy to address this aggressive behavior.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Battle Creek Police Chief Jim Blocker. We'll take a short break and come right back on WBCK. Chief Jim Blocker is here from the Battle Creek Police. So you were clear a moment ago that the idea is that there's not a rule there that helps you deal with aggressive panhandling. So if the call came today that such a thing was happening and you had to respond to it, give us a notion of how that might go.
Well, it's like anything. We deal with a lot of issues in our community that really don't have a criminal nexus. They may be a civil disagreement and disorder, and so officers have to use their diplomacy skills to try to address a lot of these issues and influence good decisions once they get there. But that's about as far as we can go. We can try to sell the parties on the idea that there are other options. Please consider taking them. But that's not normally. So society looks to us to say, all right, you folks show up and you cease the action because the law and therefore the community supports you in that effort. Mm-hmm. And then the courts also are supporting effort. Without a law, we don't have that solid foundation, and we're not buttressed by the support of the law and therefore the community and the criminal justice system. And so that's what we're asking for. Give us a law that at least lays the foundation to address this specific issue. And then if we do go to an enforcement effort, whatever the scenario may be, then we take it to the halls of justice and allow them to work with it.
Mm-hmm. Right. So as you said, at this point, it's a matter of discussion and diplomacy. And if there were to be a clearer law in place, then you could say, here's the violation.
A much clearer delineated line in terms of what are the rules and what are not the rules, mm-hmm. what's allowed and what's not allowed.
The published story about this latest info session in which you participated indicated that you made a remark in that meeting that this is not, you don't go to these things, the police department doesn't, with the notion to try and be aggressive or try to be punitive in trying to influence that behavior at this point.
That's exactly right. Again, enforcement is always the last option, specifically with these types of laws and these types of crimes or instances, because we recognize the futility of it all, and that it's not necessary going to get us what we need on a particular situation.
All right. Chief Jim Blocker is here. We'll talk weather here for a second, and then a couple of other things on our agenda here in our next few minutes. Chief Jim Blocker is with us from the Battle Creek Police Department. When last we spoke, the discussion was going on about the potential for a new police headquarters. The budget was a part of that whole discussion that pushed that forward. That has moved a bit forward since then, hasn't it?
It has. So the commission did vote to allow us to move forward with a design-build contract, and it really is. It's a wonderful opportunity for the community. It's a great opportunity for the department to reset and to look forward. And there are some exciting strategies that we plan to bring to our community that are new. And when I say new, nationally, they're new. And I'm not just saying this to say that we are any different or we're significant, only in that we're trying something different here in regards to working with the social service providers, directly working with them in our community. Because to my point earlier, a lot of the calls we deal with aren't criminal in nature. And so officers need to get smart on what are some of those other issues and who are the right people to bring to those calls, or at least to take those calls to address the issue.
What might be an example then of a new headquarters building that would help foster what you're talking about?
So what we have done is, even in our current facility, we have a room that's overcrowded. And in that room are folks from CPS, Juvenile Protective Services. We have a detective in there. We have an analyst in there. We have some folks from the counter-drug department there. We've got Homeland Security agent in there. We've got our undercover folks, representative in there. We have special agents from MDOC in there. So all of those folks bring with them their knowledge and their skills and their expertise in a particular function of the law or service within the community. And so as an officer, for example, was able to walk in the door and say, I think we have a problem. The juvenile probation officer got with our patrol officer and said, hey, I think we have some young people that may be involved in solicitation, prostitution, And matter of fact, it may be even worse. It may be human trafficking. And so in less than 9 days, we were able to find all 3 young ladies, arrest 5 suspects, and then in less than 20 days, it was before a federal grand jury up in Grand Rapids. That wouldn't have happened unless we had all of these players in the room focus and concentrated on their lanes, working together to solve this issue. And that's just one phenomenal example of how this center of excellence, this fusion center that we're finding, is working. And really, we discovered it by accident.
And so that becomes a major focus of whatever design you'll come up with for a new facility.
It's become the focus.
Yeah.
It's worked so well. It's been so phenomenal. That has been the main effort as we move forward, and we have brought on this design team.
Is it fair to say then that law enforcement nationwide tends to now revolve around that notion that collaboration is at the center?
You know, the one thing these last 36 months I think have compelled law enforcement and communities to do, even movements like the Black Lives Movement, that despite your opinion, what it has done, it's compelled us to take a critical eye at how do we do things, how are we performing, and how are we responding to the totality of our community needs based on the circumstances and the community perspective. And because of that, we've had to really focus on things that I think prior to this period of time, we really didn't focus on.
And I presume that you're affected too when you hear about, there's another one today, a police-involved shooting in San Diego today. That this somehow folds into this nexus of thinking, this collaborative approach.
Well, I don't know. It's really hard to. We are responding to our community needs because we recognize we need our community to do our job well. I mean, that's at the heart of community policing. Now, the violence against police, that is something that's really a challenge for us to hone in on and to tell you why it's happening. Every case is different. I think the Baton Rouge shootings, I think the Dallas shootings were very distinct in that they were ambushes. They were designated specifically for the police, targeted to the police. Whereas I don't know exactly. I, like you, woke up this morning and heard the tragic news, and of course, as the news develops, we're going to hear more about why it happened. But police work is dangerous. We are already, I believe, year to date at 69 officers killed in the line of duty just this year alone, and since 2014, I believe we're about at 269. I often say if our troops were in Afghanistan or Iraq right now and these were the numbers, we'd hear about them daily and we'd want to talk about them. And I think we need to carry this conversation forward and get a better understanding about why it's happening, because violence against the community is just as unacceptable as violence against the police. And sure, we have some problematic shootings. Sure, we have some problematic officers nationally. But that doesn't take into account the hundreds and thousands of positive interactions, good decisions, de-escalations, and where officers could have used deadly force and chose not to. That's the story we need to talk about, and that's how law enforcement should be represented as the true professionals and brave men and women that they are.
At least a minute here before you go to make reference to the Summit Point Engagement Center that was announced this week. Chief Blocker on the board at Summit Point now, and you were involved in some of these discussions.
Well, we were. So Summit Point, along with Bronson Battle Creek, our department, other agencies, Substance Abuse Council, everyone recognized that we had a significant opioid abuse problem. Over 50 overdoses, 7 deaths just since January alone. This was an all-out effort. This was a team effort with Summit Point in the lead. And they really leaned into this. I think one thing we recognize, our numbers look bad, so what are we going to do about it? And what's great is Summit Point, under the leadership of Jeannie Goodrich and with the support of the Battle Creek Community Foundation, they really leaned into this problem. And instead of talking about it, we actually moved to do something about it. And so that engagement center is one more opportunity and resource for my officers, Michigan State Police, county officers, all law enforcement in our community to be able to take folks after they've been screened at the hospital, to have that opportunity to speak to professionals about their addiction, about the challenges ahead, and at least give them an exit strategy for tomorrow.
Well, and I'm reminded as you say that I think one of the times when you were here more recently, you made the reference that there was not an entity in the community that would do that. So this seems to be as a result of some of those perspectives.
It's exactly one of the first things we identified. Where would we take somebody? What can we do? What resources are available? And we realized there was a significant vacuum. And so this has been a move to fill that vacuum.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing more of those details soon. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you for having me.
Talk to you again soon. Battle Creek Police Chief Jim Blocker.